Hi, this is Pam, and welcome to the Christian Science Monitor for Friday, January the 15th. Let's start with our first article. He will do his duty. How Loyalty Led to Conflict for Mike Pence by Linda Feldman. Washington. That Vice President Mike Pence has reconciled with President Donald Trump, at least in the public telling, should come as no surprise. The Vice President is a man of deep faith and loyalty, whether it be to his family, the President he serves, or the Constitution. And so, 6 days after a deadly riot in the Capitol, spurred on by the fighting words of President Trump and crowd chants of "Hang Mike Pence," followed by the Vice President's certification of Joe Biden's victory, he is back to doing what he's always done, serving as the low-key, level-headed ballast to a mercurial president who both excited and repelled the American electorate. Vice President Pence could never be another Trump, and that was the point. Mr. Trump made him running mate precisely because he would not overshadow the boss or try to usurp his power. And therein lies the paradox of Mr. Pence. He loyally served a president who proved to be perhaps the most controversial in history, and thus Mr. Pence himself may be finished in politics. Pence clearly did his constitutional and legal duty, and he deserves credit for that, says Joel Goldstein, an expert on the vice presidency and law professor emeritus at St. Louis University. But until last week, he adds, Mr. Pence had gone way overboard in his public praise of Trump, diminishing the office and diminishing himself. A former Pence aide pushes back on the idea that the vice president is too politically damaged to run for president in 2024. Never say never, says the former aide, speaking on background. I'm not predicting, but I would anticipate that the vice president would do all the things necessary to preserve the right to say yes to running, if that's what he's called to do. Consider the incoming president. Mr. Biden himself served as vice president to a more charismatic boss and seemed finished in politics when he left office 4 years ago. But he rose to become the man for the moment. Enough voters decided, both in the Democratic primaries and on November 3rd, and in 8 days, he will become the 46th President of the United States. Mr. Biden's political ascension surely was not lost on Mr. Pence last week when he sat in the Senate chamber presiding over the counting of electoral college votes that elevated his predecessor to the presidency. After the insurrection, Mr. Pence was given the opportunity to take action against Mr. Trump with calls for him to invoke the 25th Amendment of the Constitution on the grounds that the president is mentally unstable. Under its terms, the vice president and a majority of the cabinet could implement that amendment, making Mr. Pence president temporarily. Mr. Trump would have recourse to fight the move. He will do his duty until noon on January 20th. But by all indications, Mr. Pence will not go that route. Instead, the House is poised to impeach Mr. Trump tomorrow for incitement of insurrection, which would make him the first president in U.S. history to be impeached twice, when a trial would take place in the Senate remains uncertain. Tuesday morning, as Mr. Trump prepared to take off on Air Force One for a visit to the border wall in Alamo, Texas, he called the second impeachment a continuation of the greatest witch hunt in the history of politics. It was Mr. Trump's first public appearance since the siege of the Capitol and his banning by Twitter and other social media. Yet the day felt like business as usual. Mr. Pence, too, has gone back to his routine, presiding Monday over a meeting of the Coronavirus Task Force and on Tuesday leading a video conference with governors on COVID-19 response and distribution of vaccines. He will do his duty until noon on January 20th, says the former Pence aide. Unlike Mr. Trump, the first president to skip his successor's inauguration in 152 years, Mr. Pence will also attend Mr. Biden's swearing-in and is being received as an honored guest. To some political analysts, the White House since Election Day has appeared consumed by politics and less focused on the day-to-day of governing. We've had a huge vacuum of leadership, says Susan Stokes, a political scientist at the University of Chicago and director of the school's Chicago Center on Democracy. In one striking example last Friday, Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she spoke to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff about making sure an unhinged Mr. Trump didn't launch a nuclear attack. As a practical reality, Trump has absented himself since the election, and really a little before, from the business of being president, says Professor Stokes. He has shown no interest in the least, despite the cruelty of the pandemic. The Biden transition team, in fact, has seemed to fill a bit of the vacuum, increasingly focused on messaging around the pandemic, reassuring the public that they will hit the ground running when they take office, amid a shaky start to the public vaccination program. On Friday, the Biden team announced a plan to release all available doses as soon as possible. Perhaps in response, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar announced Tuesday that the administration would no longer hold back the second shot of vaccines to speed protection of as many Americans as possible. The breach of January the 6th. For Mr. Pence, prominently filling any leadership vacuum was never on the table. He knows his lane and sticks to it. That modus operandi has mostly worked for him. But last week it went terribly awry. Mr. Trump effectively threw Mr. Pence under the bus January 6th when he urged his vice president to overturn the election result. I've never seen Pence as angry as he was today, his friend GOP Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma told the Tulsa World last Wednesday night. I had a long conversation with him, he said, after all the things I've done for Trump. After the Capitol riot, Mr. Trump and Mr. Pence reportedly didn't speak for 5 days, ending the estrangement on Monday. In reality, since then Governor Pence of Indiana was named as running mate, the two have never been an easy fit. Mr. Trump is thrice married, not always conservative populist known for making his own rules. The vice president calls himself a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. Mr. Pence pulled back from Mr. Trump in October 2016 when a tape of the GOP nominee bragging about sexually assaulting women came to light. At the time, he even reportedly told the Republican National Committee he'd be willing to serve at the top of the ticket, a move seen as almost coup-like. Memories of that episode have lingered. Trumpites never liked Mr. Pence, nor forgave him for saying he should have replaced Trump, says a Republican source close to the White House. Also, non-evangelical and Roman Catholic Republicans have distrusted his religious side, the source adds, alluding to Mr. Pence's conversion away from Catholicism and to evangelicalism when he met his future wife. In the end, if Trump enthusiasts and mainstream Republicans alike don't trust Mr. Pence, he could wind up without much of a base. But, as his former aide says, 2024 is a ways off and there's no clear Trump heir apparent. Even if the Capitol rioters were ready to hang Pence, the aide said, they represent the radical fringe, not the mainstream. It may well be that Mr. Pence's long association with Mr. Trump would doom him in 2024, both because he stuck with Mr. Trump so long and then ultimately defied him. Or it may be that, just like the Democrats in 2020, the GOP will look for something other than a charismatic outsider at the top of its ticket. How the Republicans do in the 2022 midterms with both Mr. Trump and Mr. Pence expected to campaign for candidates could be telling. And, says former GOP Republican Greg Harper of Mississippi, who serves alongside Mr. Pence in the House, his friend can point to the successes of the Trump years if he runs, including tax reform, moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, and Middle East peace agreements. Mike Pence is one of the finest people I know, says Mr. Harper. He's one who doesn't take shortcuts. He's always going to follow the Constitution. And staff writer Story Hinckley contributed to this report. Now for our next article. End of years-long Saudi-Qatar feud reunites families and a region by Taylor Luck. Amman, Jordan. Feuding royals hugging, music videos celebrating brotherhood, or national television, the pomp and ceremony of Saudi Arabia and Qatar's reconciliation, which ended a blockade that divided the Arab world, was schmaltzy as it was momentous. In 2017, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates initiated a blockade against Persian Gulf neighbor Qatar for its support for Islamic movements during the Arab Spring, the influence of its oft critical Al Jazeera network, and its perceived closeness to Iran. Travel to and from Qatar was banned. The country's only land border was blocked, and Qatari flights were barred from Gulf airspace. Riyadh and Abu Dhabi even threatened to instigate a coup, forcing Qatar to build a new alliance with Turkey. Now, 3.5 years after a fracture that did little more than divide citizens and hurt economies, Gulf Arab reconciliation is ushering in a renewed appreciation for and reliance on regional cooperation. While observers debate how much the Gulf Cooperation Council, or the GCC, reconciliation pact signed last week at a summit in Al Ula, Saudi Arabia, was pure PR, Gulf citizens who were told by state media for years to turn against each other have been instantly reconnected. Overnight borders reopened and flights resumed. Family reunions. There was a sense of palpable joy from divided families and friends in a tribal region that is perhaps more connected by blood and trade than any other regional bloc. Gulf media were full of stories of daughters reunited with their parents, grandparents meeting their grandchildren for the very first time. The most effective party from the blockade were the people of the GCC, and those who will most feel the benefits of this blockade ending are GCC citizens, says Naja Al-Otabi, a London-based Saudi analyst. Single tribes stretch from the tip of Oman up to Kuwait, and families woven by decades of intermarriages among citizens of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE were suddenly divided when Riyadh and Abu Dhabi imposed the 2017 blockade. When the GCC came to life 4 decades ago, it made travel easy. It helped to reconnect these families and tribes divided by the borders of the nation state, said Abdullah Babood, an Omani analyst and visiting professor at Waseda University. These connections don't suddenly go away in a blockade or political divisions. This reconciliation is a return to normal. Confronting the pandemic. Another area impacted by the deal, brokered in part by Jared Kushner as the Trump administration wound up its Mideast diplomacy, is public health. In their reconciliation announcement, Gulf leaders established the Gulf Center for Disease Prevention and Control to coordinate efforts in combating COVID-19 and potential future pandemics. Aside from a much publicized Zoom call of all Gulf health ministries in March 2020, insiders and observers say there had been minimal coronavirus coordination among Gulf states. This is despite that, within the Arab world, the Gulf has been hit especially hard. Its combined population of 55 million people has recorded 1 million cases and 10,000 deaths. The center, in coordination with Gulf Health Ministries, will assist in vaccine rollout, information sharing, and research concerning COVID-19 and other infectious diseases. This reconciliation agreement injects hope into the idea of regional economic integration and cooperation, says Giorgio Cafiero of Gulf State Analytics, a Washington, D.C. based consulting firm, cautioning that political divisions nevertheless remain. We can see some positive and significant changes in the struggle against COVID-19. Economic integration. The GCC's Reconciliation Declaration also called for the activation of the much-delayed common Gulf market and a customs union to set uniform trade policy, tariffs, and a single point of entry for Gulf imports. Observers and citizens say Even the most basic steps towards economic integration would alleviate pressure on oil-reliant Gulf states desperate to diversify and privatize their state-run economies amid a pandemic. 1 year on from the crash in oil prices, oil only last week reached the $50 per barrel mark and remains well below $60, the fiscal break-even point for every Gulf state, save for Qatar. Gulf states are all looking for ways to keep businesses afloat while facing budget deficits of 12 to 20% of gross domestic product 1 year after paying out a combined $97 billion in bailouts to private sector and semi-private sector businesses in 2020. The impact of the pandemic was positive in the sense that Gulf states realized that the Gulf is stronger when they are united, and they have to be united as we are all facing a common challenge, says Dr. Otabi, the Saudi analyst. Another boost by the reapproachment is the realm of sports and entertainment. With Qatar set to host soccer's World Cup in 2022, the end of the blockade will not only allow for easier logistics for teams and fans to reach Doha, but also let other Gulf states to entice visitors to see the sights in their countries. Lingering divisions. But questions remain whether greater cooperation and shared economic and health threats can paper over ideological divisions. Observers caution that deep-seated differences remain between Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE despite the televised hugs. Crucially, the reconciliation agreement did not address Doha's support for Islamist movements in the region, which the UAE views as a threat to its own stability and was a stated reason for the 2017 blockade. Nor did the agreement address Qatar's alliance with Turkey and its deepening economic reliance on Iran. Both partnerships it strengthened due to the blockade. Meanwhile, Oman and Kuwait do not share Saudi Arabia's view of Iran as an imminent threat to be neutralized, but rather as a neighbor with whom Gulf states must normalize peaceful ties. Other observers say such differences make the Al-Ula Pact goals of a joint defense agreement and military integration unrealistic for now. You can't move to the final stage of political unity when you don't have economic unity or a common market, says Mr. Babood, the Omani analyst. The whole idea of regional integration is that you work on a lower level, build confidences and trust, and work higher to the political level. I am cautiously optimistic now that due to the crisis of COVID-19 and oil prices, we will start to see serious, concrete action. Healing bruised feelings. Hopes are high the deal will cool the polarization fueled by state-run media, talking heads, and social media influencers, all of which were used by governments to attack one another and peddle conspiracy theories. Previously, UAE-backed media personalities called for the overthrow of the Qatari emir and accused Doha of terrorism, while Qatari networks denounced the UAE as waging a war on democracy and promoted rumors of Saudi royal family feuds, murder plots, and insurrections. As the deal was signed, Gulf satellite networks suddenly broadcasted music videos of Gulf citizens singing together and holding hands. Saudi state networks brought on analysts citing the need for Gulf diplomacy and brotherly ties with Qatar. Qatar's Al Jazeera played travel agency, posting clips hailing the beauty of Abu Dhabi and Riyadh and Al Ula. Although Gulf media are now falling in line with the decisions of princes and kings, observers question when and if the vitriol and fervid nationalism fed to their publics the past 4 years will dissipate. Governments of these countries can sign an agreement, but that doesn't mean the Qataris are going to forget what happened to them, or the public forget what was said in the media on a daily basis, said Mr. Kafiro of Gulf State Analytics. Get the Monitor stories you care about delivered to your inbox. Sorry about that. You cannot go 100 miles per hour in one direction, press a button, and suddenly be back where you started. Injuries have occurred on both sides, and there are bruises, Mr. Babood said. But over time, these bruises will heal. Well, this next article is titled, In a Brooklyn Kitchen, a Statue of Liberty's Spirit Offers a Fresh Start by Sarah Matusek. In New York, one fall morning in a white-walled Brooklyn bistro, a chef folds his arms into wings and flaps. Chicken, duck, turkey, these are all examples of poultry, says Chef Alexander Harris, drawing out the last word. The culinary director is used to patiently pantomiming vocabulary and other kitchen terms for students learning English. In today's lesson on moist heat cooking methods, his red marker fills a whiteboard with words like simmer and sous vide. A student snaps a photo on his phone before the canvas is cleared. Mr. Harris's three aproned pupils sit attentively, binders open, spaced apart at steel-topped tables. They hail from the countries of Georgia, Dominican Republic, and Ivory Coast, but all are carving out fresh starts in New York. United by their kitchen uniform, they nod in understanding beneath the black baseball caps and masks. They become the new batch of graduates from Emma's Torch today. Doubling as an eatery, the nonprofit trains asylum seekers, refugees, and human trafficking survivors for culinary careers and pays them to learn. In a city where most restaurant workers are immigrants, entering the industry can mean a first step towards financial security for newcomers with limited English. Moreover, the Biden administration pledged to increase U.S. refugee admissions from the current 15,000 annual cap to 125,000, highlights the need for social enterprises like Emma's Torch. The nonprofit has helped launch the new lives of over 100 students with an ethos as warm as the bistro's butter-thick air. My work is not charity, says founder Carrie Brody. It's really about trying to give other people the access to those opportunities and make sure that they feel supported in pursuing them. She named her nonprofit for the Jewish poet Emma Lazarus, whose 1,883 lines give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, grace the Statue of Liberty pedestal. The sentiment echoes in Miss Brody's family history. Her great-grandparents emigrated from Lithuania to South Africa during World War II, the only members of their immediate family to survive the Holocaust. Nuts idea? Working with the LGBTQ civil rights organization Human Rights Campaign in Washington until 2016, Ms. Brody watched as the global population of displaced persons swelled to over 65 million, surpassing World War II numbers. Underscoring the implications of this global trend for her was the now iconic image of Alan Kurdi, the Syrian boy who drowned along with two other family members in the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, Ms. Brody was spending a couple of mornings a week volunteering at a homeless shelter. As she handed out muffins, she recalls bonding with the women she served over food memories Ms. Brody learned to cook for women in her own family. These experiences helped marinate her idea for Emma's Torch. Over a diner in 2015, Miss Brody's husband brought up her nuts idea, she says. He offhandedly said to me, "Someone should do it, why not you?" And I think that was the very scary aha moment. She started culinary school in New York City in 2016, then launched the nonprofit's first apprenticeship after graduation a year later. Emma's Torch added a restaurant in the Carroll Gardens neighborhood in 2018, followed by cafe space at a local library. From over 40 countries, participants range widely in life experience and age. Culinary classes are complemented with lessons in job readiness and personal development, like interview prep, resume help, and life coping skills. Emma's Torch also aids graduates with job placement to ensure good matches. We're really looking for people who are ready and willing to start to make that change in their life, says Ms. Harris. Students graduate ready to impress. The one thing that always blew me away was the work ethic, says Jennifer Nelson, managing partner at Buttermilk Channel, which has hired a couple of alumni. Diligent job placement efforts appear to pay off. The nonprofit reports that 97% of its 100 plus alumni have landed jobs within 3 months of graduation. Emma's Torch is like the foundation to help us become confident, says Thu Pham, who started as a line cook after graduation in 2018 and now works as a private chef. When Mr. Pham arrived in the United States from Vietnam in 2016, Ms. Pham, she left behind a nonprofit career helping disadvantaged children. Starting life from scratch in a new country, she had difficulty landing a job. Ms. Pham learned about Emma's Torch through a refugee organization. She always loved cooking for family and friends, she said, and was overwhelmed when her application was accepted. The most challenging part was learning English along with the vocabulary of cuisine. With the help of Google Translate, she laughs when trying to explain which pan is a hotel pan. Ms. Pham had hoped to sell her hot sauce drizzled rice crust Vietnamese pizza at a food market, but the pandemic botched her plans. All the more, she said, she valued the virtual classes Emma's Torch extended to alumni during life under lockdown, especially on starting a business. That's very useful information, especially for me, says Ms. Pham, who still aspires to a venture of her own. The organization is piloting an entrepreneurial track to equip recent graduates for leadership roles. Pandemic pivot. In-person operations shut down in March. Without diners, the nonprofit that had operated on 55% earned revenue from the restaurant took a financial hit. Donations from community members and past funders were a bright spot. Every time a gift card order came through, it was a reminder that people know we're going to get through this, says Ms. Brody. A federal Paycheck Protection Program loan has also offered reprieve. The shutdown intensified the nonprofit's focus on helping its network. Every morsel of leftover food was distributed to students and alumni so they wouldn't go hungry, Ms. Brody said. With the apprenticeship on pause, trainees no longer received $15 an hour wages. Emma's Torch reports helping 77 students and alumni file for unemployment. After careful planning, Emma's Torch reopened its cafe for takeout in November. The menu still features American fare infused with students' backgrounds, like black-eyed pea hummus and shashuka sandwiches. The school also rebooted with smaller cohorts to respect social distancing. Heightened attention to safety is routine, with hourly cleaning of high-touch surfaces and regular hand washing. We talk to our students constantly about the idea that each of us are ambassadors of public health, says Ms. Brody. Graduation is typically a lively event involving guest chefs. Scaled back due to COVID-19, Fanta Silla's December graduation had her prepare a fresh salad and coconut flan for the incoming class. Ms. Silla had worked as a humanitarian in Ivory Coast. The asylum seeker came to the U.S. in 2017 alone, but says she found family at Emma's Torch. On a break from baking buttermilk biscuits, she said, "I'm happy to be here. I started a new life, and I'm proud of that." Ms. Silla particularly liked learning the art of customer service and says she hopes to divide her time between food and psychology careers. She'll miss the kitchen people with whom she shared family meals in the afternoon. "It's a beautiful school. It's a family," she says. Well, friends, that concludes the reading of the Christian Science Monitor for Friday, January 15th. This is Pam saying be safe until we meet here again. Be blessed and make it a great day.